Hello and welcome to Counterpressed on The Ringer and Spotify. I'm in the studio with Jessy Humphreys and Becky Taylor-Gill. On today's show, it's the return of the Counterpressed Book Club as we review Mary Earps' autobiography, All In. Guys, it's been a while since we've done a book club, actually.
It feels weird doing a sofa book club. I feel much more Oprah.
Yeah. It's good vibes,
But
actually.
I did like before when it was like, you know, we were at the big table. I felt very serious.
Like a business meeting book club.
Yes.
Yeah. If for anyone that's new here, you can go and find such episodes as Alex Scott's book, Casa Semenya's autobiography, which was very interesting and fun. And, of course, who could forget Cleat Q?
Which I actually re-listened to that episode fairly recently and it really made me laugh again.
Yeah, I listen anytime I usually when I start dating someone, and they're like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, I do a podcast. And then they're like, oh, send it to me. I'll send them the Cleat Q episode because I'm like, it's our funniest. And I will always listen to it back to perceive myself through their eyes. Obviously.
This is actually the exact thing I did. This is why
Exactly. Lesbianism. Obviously, I've been in a relationship for about a year now, so I haven't listened to it in a while, but I have listened to it many times, and it is just really funny.
So Cleat Q, for context, was an erotic football themed novel.
Or as someone on Twitter who was having a go at me this week called it lesbian filth.
People always come back to it to devalue.
It was like not
it's definitely
super
erotic.
but it
smart,
was. It was smart.
say.
It was
Smart, yes.
It was romantic and a little bit and quite sexy, but not super erotic.
I don't know.
Was it quite full on?
It was.
I can't
she
remember
uses some choice words for a vagina. Let me tell you
and
that.
actually, famously, didn't it get commissioned into a TV show?
Yeah, I thought Rapinoe bought the
Sue
rights.
Bird and Rapinoe's thing. So
I can't wait.
That actually really justified our inclusion of it as well. After we did get some people saying lesbian filth.
So annoying because people always
good
come
enough
back
for
to
those
it
two.
to be like, you read lesbian filth on the podcast to devalue like the other good work that we do. Sorry, actually, no, Cleat Q is good work. It's just a different type.
Some of our best work.
But also, like, we can be smart and also read smart. Like, let women and non-binary people do things.
Can I also say that I had a Cleat Q message on LinkedIn of all places. So people take that stuff seriously because someone...
You are such a LinkedIn
You
fiend.
are such a
Flo
LinkedIn
texted me this
influencer.
morning, being like, "Did you see this thing on LinkedIn?" I was like,
No.
Flo, no.
Well, no, it was important. Dawn Scott announced her new high-performance business and she had a spooky season theme to her LinkedIn post. I thought it was hilarious. Anyway, congratulations, Dawn. She won't be listening.
Did you react with a...
I should have done. I posted my piece about Mary Earps, which was like a sort of continual conversation from Monday about sort of girl boss feminism and how it's really tied up in women's sport at the moment. And someone commented saying, great piece, can't wait for the book club. Cleat Q is one of the best episodes of all time.
Wow.
So I was like, wow, even the corporate world respects Cleat Q, guys. Put some respect on Cleat Q's name. I think the ebook cost us 99p. So there you go. Anyway, of course.
I bought a physical copy.
Have you got a physical copy?
Yeah.
Well,
Why? You need to bring it in.
Yes, I
we need
should,
it on the
actually.
show.
we need it on the shelf,
Yeah.
actually. Okay, well, of course, people would have probably watched and listened to Monday's show where we spoke a lot about Mary Earps' extracts in her book, especially around Serena Bigman and Hannah Hampton. That's going to come up today, but we also want to paint a much bigger picture because we have read the whole book. So let's get into it after this. So, Mary Earps' All In. It's an autobiography, but it's also billed as a leadership, sort of self-help book, which is very much on brand and on trend across the world of sport at the moment. She's not the only one releasing books like this. It charts her life from early childhood, school, club career, and then winning the Euros, playing in a World Cup final, and the international retirement, PSG, etc., Sports Personality of the Year, right up until quite recently, to be honest. And when we do our book club episodes, we usually start by just saying kind of overall, did we think the book was good before we get into the kind of unpacking the themes. So let's start there. Did we like the book?
The pause.
In terms of kind of gossipy content, yes. I mean, it's fun to sort of read about stuff, and I kind of do have not respect, that would be the wrong word, but I'm like, fairs for airing out so much dirty laundry. But I would say apart from those kind of 10 pages is probably what that adds up to, not the rest of it, no.
I agree. Obviously, after the excerpts came out, I was like, right, let me get stuck in. And it takes 200 pages to get to the gossip. That's too many pages.
It's surprisingly long.
Mm.
And I think I will touch deeper on this feeling, I think, throughout the episode. But my overarching feeling is just two things. One, it's just too soon. It's very clearly far too soon for you to be talking about these things. You're still playing. This happened, what are we in? This happened six months ago,
basically. Yeah.
It's obviously way too soon. It's obviously rushed out, and you can tell that from the way it's written, the closeness that she has to it, where she can't take a step back and talk about it in an objective way. It's obviously she's just poured out all of this feeling onto these pages. And secondly, I think you mentioned this in the pod on Monday. I think like comparing it to Alex Scott's book, which actually I was like unexpectedly blew me away. Alex Scott's book. I think she talked so beautifully about her life, and she had clearly been to a lot of therapy. I don't think Mary's done that. Her life story is difficult and it's hard, and there is a challenge. There is so much outside of football that was difficult for her, and she talks about it so well. I'm sorry, Mary Earps, going to prep school and feeling out of place is not a difficult life story. There are definitely pieces in this book where I'm like, that sounds really difficult. Again, she's clearly not ready to talk about them, so she doesn't go deeply into them. But like talking about your childhood as if it's like something really difficult because you went to prep school and it was really hard, it's just so infuriating to me. Sorry, I've really like gone deeply into this immediately.
That point that you just made, I think, is the thing that really stands out for me, and something that I found a little bit hard around, you know, the pushback that's been, which is like she also talks about other stuff, or you need to read the full book to get the context, which of course we have, is that the stuff that she does talk about, you know, sort of the non-football-y themes, let's say, you know, she talks about bullying, she talks about her relationship with food, she talks about her relationship with alcohol, she talks about her relationship to her sexuality. All of those things felt to me incredibly brushed over. There was no, you know, serious exploration of them in a way that I felt like was interesting or enlightening.
Or meaningful.
And I think you're right, that's because of her closeness to the situation, or because she hasn't had enough therapy to like really be able to, you know, understand it or know how to talk about it. And I think what I find hard is it feels like that's quite hard to talk about, because you don't want to say, you know, this stuff which is vulnerable that she has shared, you don't want to say like that's bad, or do you know what I mean? You don't want to critique that, but at the same time, like, it doesn't really offer, I think, what she thinks it maybe is offering.
A couple of things I want to pick up on. One of the biggest differences as well between this book and, say, Alex Scott's is the time that's passed. You know, Alex Scott got into some really quite traumatic and vulnerable things, but she got into them deeply. And Earps didn't really touch upon that surface level, apart from in a few different things, which I think we'll come on to, especially her relationship with her parents, which I think you can see there's a real struggle there, but I don't think she acknowledges it out loud almost, which I almost think is sadder to read than if you went deeper on it and say, my relationship with my parents is quite tough, because you read those pages and you're thinking, this sounds quite awful.
And I think it's clear that she hasn't processed that herself, and that's why she can't talk about it. Is that she hasn't taken a step back and been like, God, this relationship with my parents is really difficult for several reasons.
Which is also understandable, because the reason why her relationship with her parents is difficult, or the stuff that she hints at the book, is about her relationship with her girlfriend and how that's clearly impacted it. And it's like, that's a real ongoing thing, which is a relationship that obviously sort of started 3 or 4 years ago, and you're still probably dealing with kind of the repercussions and realities of all of that. It's understandable that you haven't figured that out yet, but that's why you don't necessarily write a book right now.
And also, that's actually probably a piece that's very relatable to some of the audience, but I don't think she gets into it enough. The other thing that I think is a real clash, just talking about the overarching theme of the book, is I think it's trying to do too many different things. So you've got saying it's autobiography, but it's based around these chapter names, which try and make it seem like it has a bigger lesson learned element.
And they are awful.
Well, they're just so vague. So
Sorry, her inspirational content it just gets me. So like the clothing line.
My personal favourite chapter, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's the one where it's like, learn how to eat alone. I'm like, huh?
But the thing is, right, so this is very common in books at the moment, especially books around sport. So Enya Luko's book did this. I enjoyed that book. I thought it was a pretty good book. Alex Scott's book did this too. I
don't think those two are as explicit in it as, say, and I think that's talks about the way publishing has moved even more extreme on this than, say, like Wiegmann's and Hayes, which are they're slightly different because they're more the like lessons on leadership one,
And
which is also what like Southgate's one is, which is also out today.
Yeah.
But yeah,
but that's the way it's going. Is you can't just do an autobiography anymore because people are worried non-fiction print is dead and sports autobiographies are dead. So it has to have some kind of purpose. Whereas actually, I think if they just played it more clear here and said, frankly, it is a tell-all because that's what it is, rather than trying to dress it as something more. So I'll tell you some of the chapters here, right? It's split into various parts. You've got part 1, preparation, part 2, intuition, part 3, going all in, okay? It's all so vague. I wouldn't say any of those parts speak of that. The chapter names, everything to completion, rely on repetition, compete with your yesterday
everything
self.
to completion, quite funny.
Uniqueness to be I mean, it's all so vague. How they even managed to squeeze enough of these motivational chapter names.
And you can tell that's
a total of 27
because her number was 27.
But how did you get 20?
They've gone backwards from the number 27 and been like, we need 27 of these inspirational quotes.
Brainstorming
that
session.
Must have been the chat GPTing that would have gone on in that is just awful. And I think that makes it worse for me when you're trying to tie up doing two things, which is saying it's not a tell-all when actually the most powerful, notable content in there is the tell-all stuff.
And you know that it is because the excerpts that have come out are the ones that are tell-all. You know that is your selling point, and you know that's what's going to make people buy the book.
Yeah.
But you're just pretending that it's not for some moral, like, high horse.
The other thing as well, you sort of touched on it earlier, Becky, about the rushedness of it. You see that a lot in the factual inaccuracies, which I think was a frustration amongst all of us. So you've got something which isn't necessarily a strong factual inaccuracy, but it shows a lack of attention to detail in the fact that she refers to Nottingham Forest as Notts Forest, when Notts County and Forest is the big rivalry in that town. So you probably wouldn't say that, but okay. But the real ones which rattled me, because it's basic stuff, and like I wrote a kid's book which is about like the history of women's football, and those guys were fact checking me, and there's basic stuff that was missed here. So she refers to Beth Mead scoring the equaliser in the Euros against Spain.
And also, can I say, if I was Ella Toon, I'd be like,
bitch,
where are my flowers?
Yeah. And that's really basic stuff, guys. It's not long ago. It's not like you can say, oh, we couldn't find evidence of it. It's like everyone knows that.
Just check.
One Google.
She refers to the incorrect scoreline in the Republic of Ireland game that Hannah Hampton famously played in. She said it was 1-0, it was 2-0. She says, this one, I had to keep me reading it.
I reread this sentence about 4 times because I was so confused. She says, I decided to go to the Champions League final at Wembley to watch my England teammates play for Arsenal. I was like, you know that gif where it's like everything's moving in front of your face? I was like, she was watching the Arsenal men's team? They weren't in Champions League final. Why is she at Wembley? The Champions League final. And then I was like, no, she's just like written that it was at Wembley when it was in Lisbon.
It was in Lisbon, yeah. That also annoyed me. And I think that the rushness of it, the timing of it, it's too close, it's too raw, it's too much in the public eye right now. And I appreciate the pressure to release something when everyone is still talking about you.
It's your 15 minutes of fame.
And like, I understand the publishers and her team would be like, we've got to do it now because no one's going to care. And obviously Alex Scott is so public in the broadcast work she does, and she did Strictly, etc. So there probably wasn't a rush, even though she would have had approaches at the time. But again, I think so much of it comes to that bad management around all of it, around the ghostwriting, the publishing, the editing, as well as what we're seeing in the press tour and the management now. You know, we touched it on Monday, but that press tour should have been shut down after the weekend. The interviews continued this week. Stuff like that. I'm like, have your team got your best interests at heart? Because yes, a lot of this is her decision, of course, but the role of the people that work with you is to also like check on you, maybe call you out, maybe make sure that you're not going to make mistakes and bumps. But it sounds like everyone was all in on something that's been seriously damaging for her, and I'm quite concerned about how she comes back from the content in this, because a lot of people will say, read it all. It gets worse the more you read. It really does.
And I think one of the best things I've sort of seen on it was Rory Smith was on Monday Night Football on 5 Live, and he was talking about his experiences as a ghostwriter, and specifically ghostwriting Mike Richards' book, who's someone he's like friends with, and saying that obviously to an extent as a ghostwriter you do want these like good stories because they are going to propel the book forward and they are going to get attention, but like the person needs to be like comfortable with that. And in that scenario, I think he was kind of talking about a story that Micah wasn't comfortable with, and like they didn't include. And I don't feel like that's happened here. I can't imagine Mary wasn't. I feel like Mary wanted to talk about this stuff, but I think there's like a lesson there as well, like for the ghostwriter who, you know, maybe has a better understanding of like how this stuff is going to blow up than, you know, a footballer who I think you can tell, and a lot in this book has quite a fractious relationship with the media. There's like a very bizarre page where she goes off at a women's football journalist who goes to see her in PSG, and you can feel that she has that underlying tension with what's been written about her. And given all that, yeah, I do kind of feel like whether it's her manager or the ghostwriter or the publisher, it feels like someone should have like stepped in and been like, well, you clearly already don't feel very comfortable. And I would go so far as to say you seem paranoid about stuff, because the incident with the journalist that she like talks about, I went back and reread the piece, which she describes as a hatchet job. And it's like fairly small fry, I would say, in the grand scheme of things, especially in what's come from the book, like what's been written about this week. Like that looks like quite pleasant, I think. Yeah, so it's for someone not to step in and say, you know, this is really risky if this is something you're already clearly not very comfortable with.
Yeah, and they had a conversation on Stick to Football this week, which is obviously mainly men's footballers, but Roy Keane's done 2 books, Wrighty's done 2 books, Neville's done 2 books, Paul Scholes said he did a picture book, which everyone really enjoyed that moment. But it was very, you know, all of them came round to the same thing, which is like, there's naivety here. There's naivety in not expecting certain things to blow up, and not seeing that in the content, I think is very true here, because they all speak in Stick to Football about, like, especially Neville. I mean, Roy Keane obviously takes no prisoners regardless, but Neville was talking about when Yap Stan's book came out, it made massive headlines, and there was actually a chunk that was taken out of context because he was referring to the Neville brothers as a very the worst swear word you can say. I'm not going to say it on here, and but it was actually in this kind of like irritating, jovial way. But it made huge headlines, and Yap Stan rang up Gary and said, "I'm really sorry. Like, if you like, this is actually kind of been taken out of context." I'd understand it a bit more if this was the case for this book, but actually it goes deeper and deeper, and there's more and more that you uncover, and those extracts aren't necessarily just the biggest tell-alls and the things that are taken out of context.
I think to Jessy's point about her being paranoid about the press, and I think it's very clear throughout this book, and it gets clearer and clearer, that she is extremely uncomfortable with fame itself.
Which actually reminded me of when we spoke to Rachel Daly.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well,
thing. She's very uncomfortable with fame itself. She's very, very uncomfortable with the idea that anything she says could be taken in not the exact way she means it. And I think that's why she's written this book, is entirely because she's like, I need to set the story straight. I need to tell people exactly why I did this thing so that people understand my point of view. And I don't think that's a good enough reason to write a book.
That's really important to recognise, because I think there's a difference between kind of feeling like you can state your case, but actually creating more confusion and question marks. And I understand for a lot of people in the media, and especially for footballers, they feel like they have to talk because they have to do things on their terms, and they feel like there's too much kind of assumptions and speculation. And she kind of talks about that in the way that her time at United ended, right? Is she felt very much like the truth wasn't out there. So this is her solution, but also that isn't always the right thing to do. Just because you feel like this could set the record straight doesn't mean that it necessarily will. And I think she's kind of really wrapped up in this being the way to answer everything at once. And it just can't do that. And I think
it's obviously gone also completely the opposite way.
Yeah.
She has only invited more scrutiny, more fame, more eyes on her, and more confusion about what she said. And I think it's not helped her feel better and be like, this is why I did this. And there's I'm morally correct, my values are correct. If she says morals and values one more time, I'm gonna lose it. It's done the opposite of that. It's invited everybody to be like, actually, I even more think that this was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I also think, I've been thinking this for a while, and maybe people will say, oh, well, you're, especially Jessy and I's case, you guys are journalists, so what leg do you have to stand on because you're talking about the book and you talked about it on Monday. But I think there's a real issue, and it comes out in this book, with women's football at the moment on the expectations of what the media are there to do and their role that they play in the game, and that they are there to just kind of write match reports and maybe occasionally interview players. That is not why
Jessy JPH, am I right?
That is not why
terrible journalist.
That's not why journalism exists, and that they are there to uncover stories, whether that's sometimes positive and sometimes negative,
and comment on things. And I think this is something that you're obviously joking about what some people said about me on Twitter, but it's something that came up in relation to the pieces I've written. But I think also feels like what Earps misunderstands is like journalism. Some journalism is just about like objective fact finding, but that's not the entirety of journalism. And when she's complaining that people were pitting her and Hampton against each other, she's talking about people writing about like who should be England's number one, which I feel like is one of the most standard pieces in football journalism ever. You know, should X or Y play a star? But she sort of takes it as this is like a personal slight, when it's just like, this is how you can't generate interest in a game if you're just like, oh, there are two goalkeepers. One will start, one will be on the bench.
I think that's
Let's see what Serena does. It's like, who wants to read that?
I think that's what's really frustrating, is that I think in women's football as a whole, there is a lack of understanding of what the purpose is of the media to talk about. When we talk about, like when Leah Williamson is injured this window, who's going to capture all this kind of stuff? This is not to pit Kira Walsh and potentially Alex Greenwood against each other. It's just about talking about discussion points because England are playing. What, you think we're just going to be silent while the international window is? We're not, because we're not talking about the WSL. I think that's what I find really frustrating is I have so much, sympathy for how the England players were transported into a level of celebrity that changed their life forever. And I think Rachel Daly spoke about it really well in her episode, where she said, it's really uncomfortable. Like, people turn up to my house, people follow me, people, come to follow me in the supermarket, etc. That is really difficult. And women's football does have an issue about some really weird, obsessive fans who stalk players, and that is a serious issue. It's
and
an issue.
Earps is right to point out that whilst this is also something that affects Premier League players, they have a level of wealth which makes it much easier to minimise like the ramifications that come with that clearly women's footballers just do not have.
And I think you have to be extremely mentally resilient to deal with that.
100%.
And I think you can just tell from this book that she is not.
I also think, we've talked about it before, but there's this expectation because of where women's football came from that you should have access to the players. They should sign autographs for you. They should get pictures. I mean, she even references in the book a time when someone slagged her off on Twitter for not doing a photo with a kid, and it really hurt her. The parents that are pushing their kids to the front to get autographs need to literally piss off, because I appreciate that. I think it's sad that Earps was personally upset by that. And I think players need to understand that, annoying people on social media, you've just got to ignore them. But at the same time, I think it does speak volumes of the clash in culture where the game's at right now, where it is pushing on, it is mainstream, there is going to be criticism, analysis, it isn't just going to be surface level. And then as a result, the fans need to take a step back and also follow that lead, rather than still expecting selfies and autographs and, you know, making weird videos and all that kind of stuff. Is like, the game will hopefully move on beyond that, but we're almost like stuck in this middle sort of point. Okay, that's a lot of pre-chat already. Let's continue the conversation next. So the first big chunk of this book, sort of 150, 200 pages, is a lot about her childhood, a lot about her experiences with her family, her parents, dotting around different schools, before you get onto any kind of real football club stuff. And I think it also adds to this kind of messiness because there's so much prologue to anything of kind of recent note and relatability to us. But again, it doesn't feel like it really gets beneath the surface. It's these like shock examples of stuff. And the bullying example, you know, it's what she went through sounded like horrific at school in terms of like physical and verbal bullying. But she almost needs to follow the thread all the way through and talk about how that matters throughout as the book continues, rather than what we get in all her really tough moments. Same with when she talks about alcohol during lockdown and body image. It's like these shock flash bits, and then we kind of never reflect and speak about it again. And I think that's the real way that you get a successful book that's an autobiography, is you've got to thread that through the whole thing, rather than doing like just shock timeline, because the first chunk of the book is just shock timeline, and then you get to the England stuff, and then it's threaded through a lot more. It's almost like it was in two complete halves.
I think when I was reading about her childhood, it felt so restrictive. Everything is about, and I'm going to say it again, values, morals, and like respecting authority and not feeling like she can make mistakes. And I think that comes in, I think when I was reading that first half about her childhood, to me, it felt like it was all a prologue for Hannah Hampton. It felt like there was this unspoken thing about Hannah Hampton and how throughout her childhood, Mary felt like so overwhelmed by her love for football that she would like sob in her bedroom. But, you know, kind of her family dynamic was that you didn't talk about your feelings, you restricted that. And I think it seems like she really resents Hannah Hampton for being able to be messy, being able to be
emotive
and make mistakes and be forgiven and come back. And I think throughout her childhood and then throughout her career, I think she feels like she has had to fight to be the perfect version of herself. And you see that when she falls apart in lockdown, is that is so unsustainable. And I think the lockdown part of it is just so clearly like a complete burnout from being so authoritarian with herself, of like repetition and like, this is how I'm doing things and I'm not giving up, and it just all falls apart. And I think that I felt like that whole first part had this kind of shadow of Hannah Hampton in the back of it.
I feel like also what you've touched on there about being this perfect version of herself, you see that in the presentation of the family environment, but you see that in the way she is as well and how she presents herself. There is this perfect version of who she thinks she needs to be, and she holds herself, and the way she talks about herself is of this really high standard that she not only wants to be a goalkeeper, but she wants to inspire people. But my question would be, do you want to do that? Because I feel like you've created, or what your upbringing has potentially created, this idea of what you think you need to be, this way that you need to behave. And she talks about it when people were asking for selfies on holiday, and what she has to keep up. Mary Earps, England #1, Manchester United, face of goalkeeping, TikTok Mary, 100% all the time. And like you say, Becky, you will reach a point where you can't do that anymore. And I think maybe there hasn't been a separation enough of who the real Mary is in all this and who is the creation of Mary Earps, England, Queen of Stops.
MAE 27.
MAE 27.
Yeah.
That's what feels like it's just distorted.
I don't come away from this book being like, yes, I know who you are. I know you, the person, Mary Earps, and I know your story.
Yeah.
It's all this image, and it kind of comes back round to it at the end of like this like letter to you. Like, it is all about being this image. And I think that I again come back to, I don't think you're ready to write this book, because that's not interesting. That's not what people care about. That's not why Alex Scott's book was amazing. Her book was amazing because I felt like I really understood who she was, and she understood who she was. I don't feel like that at all coming away from this book.
And it's interesting as well, because I know this hasn't been published in English, so maybe it's a bit of an annoying like comparison, but the Sonia's book is the one that like I've like most enjoyed recently, and again I think really benefited from having, you know, when she's like sort of writing about the effect her mum passing had on her, for example, like she's talking about something that happened now like over 20 years ago, and you can really feel that she's like had the time to understand how that affected her. And I think it's really clear that this stuff for Earps is like right in front of her, and it's so fresh, and it hurts so much. Like you can feel how much it hurts. And I think that's something that's hard, but I feel like every moment I felt like sorry for her, then I kept kind of thinking about like the position that Hampton was being put in by it, and I'm like, well, it's really fresh for her as well, and it's like, but she doesn't get the opportunity to talk about it. And like I think something that really stood out to me is that she talks about after she announced her retirement, she says, on TV, some of the pundits who were the first to talk about players' mental health now offered visceral points of view about me without heed, it seemed, for the human being at the centre of the story or an understanding of any of the factors behind it. Speaking or posting words online without care for the consequences they bring to another individual could never sit okay with me. And I was just like reading that, and I was like, oh my gosh, like the lack of self-awareness here is just like, it does just take my sympathy away, because I'm like, what about speaking or posting words in a book without care for the consequences they bring to another individual?
I think that's something that really screamed to me, because a lot of it felt hypocritical, because there was the presentation of the kind of not only the women empowerment, like the pitting women against women narrative, which she claims been created in the press since the book has been published, but she is putting women against women in this book, her team, a former teammate and her former coach. And that's what I find really frustrating, because like you, Jessy, it was these moments where I really felt for her, and I felt like, God, there's a lot going on here. But then the way that you are, you know, challenging other people's language and their perceptions and what they're saying about you, you're not taking that care with other people. I mean, even as the book continues beyond the extract that The Guardian published that we talked a lot about on Monday, the way she talks about Hannah Hampton, she doesn't even say her name at times. She says, this is page 302, when my competitor played against Spain at Wembley, another showpiece against the world champions, I knew my England career was over before the match has even kicked off. Even when I outperformed her, it was never going to be good enough. I mean, it's a my competitor and a her around, like that. Just feels like there's an uncomfortableness I find with it, and that's not, you know, again 290. All of this time, relationships in the goalkeeper group were dire. There wasn't a camp that passed without incident. It continues, and watch someone else who brought problems get promoted into my role.
And I think for her, she obviously feels like Hampton's behaviour kind of justifies how she's talking about her, right? And the insinuations are like pretty extreme, because I think, you know, with the Guardian stuff, it sort of felt like it focused on what had happened at Euro 2022. But, you know, Earps basically says like this has continued, which is also not what has been implied by people, for example, at Chelsea. Like I know people were referencing the doc that was made about Emma Hayes' last season, where you sort of see Hayes kind of interacting with Hampton when Hampton sort of sat on the sidelines looking a bit grumpy and struggling. But clearly, like, stuff has changed over time. Ellen White, when she was talking on the BBC about Earps's extracts also sort of implied that, you know, it was all kind of water on the bridge and Hampton had changed, blah, blah. But Earps doesn't do that. Earps is saying this was continuing to be an issue and everyone knows it's an issue. But the problem she has as well is because she doesn't sort of say what's going on, because there are no specifics, I assume maybe because she doesn't want to get sued, or because maybe she feels like she doesn't want to, like, go so far. You can't really judge it, and so there isn't, you don't come away feeling like, because I don't know what Hampton supposedly did, I can't come away and be like, yeah, you're really justified in talking to her about that, because I'm like, well, it could be anything. It could be like, I don't know, something really bad, like, I don't know, even if it was like swearing or stropping, it doesn't sound that bad in my head, but like whatever.
Like, unless you said a slur, like, I don't think you should be talking about her this way.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like if she had said a slur, you'd probably know about it.
Yeah.
It does just seem like she was maybe a bit of a brat, but like, who wasn't at 19?
Yeah.
I'm 30, I'm still a brat.
Co-sign that. No, I think a couple of bits there as well. The hypocritical element that felt for me as well is she talks about at Reading when she took Grace Maloney's #1 spot, and she said that Grace wasn't happy about it. So she had point early on in the book to reflect on what it feels like when someone takes your spot, but then we don't get any of that later on, you know, and that's frustrating.
The quote about the goalkeepers union, I was the duck smoking laughing meme. Like, just like, yeah, of course you don't think the goalkeepers union is real.
And then there's been some discourse, because I think Ellen White talked about it on BBC's show on Monday or Tuesday, which I thought was a really good discussion with Ellen and Jen Beattie to get, again, that player perspective. And, you know, Gilly and Ellen and I think Jen are quite old school in that they would say, you know, there's a real team ethos that, like, nothing gets out and nothing gets in. And I do think when it comes to England under Serena, they are very close. The ethos is, you know, we're all in this together. And they have pushed away the media slightly to ensure that that happens. There's very little access. And you look on the pitch and you're like, well, the girls keep women, so Serena's right. So then I do think it must feel particularly, you know, probably frustrating and disappointing to see how much is aired in this book without naming names. But, you know, she does reference really personal conversations with players, in which she often doesn't name them, but also the ones with Serena. Now, as is customary with books, if you talk about someone, there'll be a kind of legal one sent for sign off. So there would have been an understanding of what was coming. But these are really back and forth conversations that she's quoting in this book. And she talks about Serena's reaction when she retired and how Serena said she was angry and she wouldn't understand the decision. She talks about what happened at St. George's Park when she went back at dinner to speak to them. Like, these are really detailed personal moments that happened in that England camp, which traditionally have been under wraps completely.
The one thing I enjoy about that, though, is I think you can also see at points where maybe Earps misunderstands what's going on. So there's the bit where they're talking about Hampton becoming #1. I can't remember exactly what exact point in the timeline it is, but basically Wiegman and the goalkeeper coach say to Earps, like, we understand where you're coming from, when Earps is talking about, like, Hampton's behaviour. And she sort of writes that that's them acknowledging that Hampton's behaviour is bad. But I kind of read that as them sort of, like, acknowledging that's how Mary feels. And so I think it's quite funny when you have these conversations that you can kind of maybe see where some of this slippage, which she obviously feels like is the betrayal, which is kind of like the core issue, right? She feels that, like, Hampton doesn't deserve to be #1 because it goes against her morals and values, and that she feels like Wiegman has destroyed sort of the England spirit that they had at the start by allowing this to happen. But it feels like all of this is maybe based on a misunderstanding that Wiegman thinks Hampton behaves badly, which is maybe just only something that Earps now believes.
I also think it unpacks, and a lot of what she speaks about during that time is also feeling like a carrot was dangled and the communication was bad, that she wanted to be told up front, however many months previous, what was going to be happening, and she felt like Wiegman's rotation was frustrating and irritating. And I actually, that's the bit I probably sympathise with the most in terms of the footballing side, because if it's really clear where you stand, it does make it easier to accept. But Earps was feeling very much like, I would play this game, then Hampton would play this game.
What kind of made me laugh about that is Earps seems to feel offended by that, because she seems to take away that Wiegman had always made this decision that it would be Hampton. But as you read through it, and Wiegman repeatedly says she hasn't made a decision, and Earps talks about how, you know, her competitor plays this game, she then plays another game. And I remember at the time when we were writing about it, like, it genuinely felt like you couldn't predict who was going to play. Like, Earps plays the game against the USA, that felt like a really big nod. Hampton plays the one against Spain, that felt like a really big nod in that direction. And Earp seems to be offended by it because she thinks Serena had already made up her mind. But what I took away from it was, like, I felt like it was pretty clear Wiegman hadn't made up her mind. And this is also some of the stuff where it's like Earps's narrative, like, she can't quite get her story straight, because part of her claim also is like she wasn't told what she needed to do. But she says very explicitly, she got the message to me through goalkeeper sessions that she wanted me to distribute differently, employing new tactics on the back line that didn't match my strengths as a player but clearly matched my competitors. And then she sort of says later on, oh, but you never explained to me, like, what I needed to do or what I couldn't do. And I'm like, well, you've already told us. And then, given all of that, I'm like, well, Wiegman giving you all of these chances feels like actually saying, I want to play this way. Can you do it? And in the end, she concluded that Hampton was just better.
Well, she
at it.
admits a couple of times in that moment, and then later on she says, I could recognise that if Serena was implementing another setup, it was because that could work and win. So she acknowledges that there was a deliberate change of style, wanting to play out from the back more, wanting to distribute differently, which is Hannah Hampton's biggest strength. She's probably the best goalkeeper in the world at doing that very thing. And I think that's another element where it's like, it is a clash point, because it's not just like she was plucked out of thin air as the choice. The style of play and what England wanted to do suited that person more. But perhaps there was better communication that could have happened in just making it more explicit. And I think Wiegman is a fantastic coach, but, you know, this maybe won't be the first time where that direct communication can sometimes become a bit of a clash, where do you manage those relationships?
She's complaining that the communication wasn't direct enough, but it feels like everything we know about Wiegman is that she is very direct. And again, it feels like, and, you know, whether this was also the case with the Bright situation, definitely what we took, I think, at the time was that both these players had directly been told they wouldn't start, whereas perhaps other managers would keep it dangling. But then it's kind of like Earps is arguing that it's dangling. So I think, again, it's like, and this comes back to what Becky's saying, where it just feels like you're too close. It's like you haven't even really, I think, been able to understand yourself what went on. And ultimately, I think, you know, this is just being human. Like, Earps loves it when Wiegman comes in and directly says to her, you're my number one, because you like hearing that communication. And she doesn't like it when she directly says to her, you're not my number one, because that hurts and it sucks. It's like, that is just being human. But it feels funny that it's like, well, actually then it's like that her communication style is bad. It's like, it's not her communication style, it's what you're hearing.
It's what she's communicating.
It's what she's communicating to you.
I think the visceral feeling of betrayal that is very clear, and I think she talks a lot about, like, England being her safe place away from, like, the chaos of Man United. Like, we all know that United is and has been, like, not a very good place in terms of investment, in terms of, like, how they support their players. And I think that is also why it's so painful to her to lose her spot in at England, because she then has to go back to this club that, like, some of the stuff that she writes about United is crazy. I think we've all said this. I felt a lot of the time when I was reading this book, I felt like so sad for her. She's obviously really struggling and has obviously really struggled throughout her career. The part that, like, really shocked me was talking about how she had basically had a dissociative episode, that she didn't understand what that was at the time, and there's several parts of this which I think are quite interesting, where someone in the changing room had said something to her that she perceived as being made fun of, and she left. She didn't do the ice bath. She drove her parents home. She doesn't remember the drive home, and she doesn't remember getting home. Two things about that. United fined her for not doing the ice bath, which I just think is, like, the most egregious, like level of not giving a shit about your players, recognizing that like she was really struggling, is like the first thing that you should be doing there. And secondly, that it comes back to that bullying, is that someone perceiving that, because she says it herself, like she perceived that to be being made fun of, not that it was. That feeling being so strong and so visceral to you that you have a dissociative episode is so sad, and just is so clear that the bullying that she suffered, like horrific bullying that she suffered during her like early teenage years, is still with her. And I think so much of that is kind of seems to me wrapped up in England camp and being chosen and being liked and being understood and, you know, not being misunderstood.
And feeling really insecure all the time.
And she
Really,
talks a
really
lot
insecure.
about struggling to make friends in football teams, right? She says, like, until she got to Wolfsburg and made friends with Babette Peters and Ella Massar and Pernilla Harder, that, like, she'd never really had friends at a club. And I was like, well, that feels like, you know, I think everyone knows that there are friendship groups and cliques in football clubs, but it sounded like very lonely and very isolating, that she was almost so focused on her football that she couldn't engage on a human level.
It's that restrictive, again, like I said, it's that restricting herself and not feeling like she can show her emotions, not being able to make those connections.
Yeah.
And tons of rejection as well, because
Yeah.
there's the rejection that she's almost not feeling necessarily enough love from her family, because it's all very straight. And then also football side, you know, obviously like falling out of the team, not necessarily falling out of the team after like heading into COVID, after Phil Neville's time's up, and then coming back under Wiegman. Like there was a huge amount of rejection, and during that time she managed to channel that into a point proving narrative with the help of the United goalkeeper coach at the time, who, you know, he did an incredible job. He was sending her voice notes, like pre-recorded podcasts every day of the World Cup, basically, or the Euros, I can't remember which tournament, which was like, he sounds like a legend, but he was like really trying to, you know, he was doing one-on-one coaching with her. He bought that ball machine for her out of his own pocket because he was so determined to see her succeed again. And she channeled that rejection into something, but obviously like she just couldn't channel that, or like everything was just all becoming too much. And then it's like she can't do that anymore. She says herself, like, she couldn't fight anymore for that spot, and there was kind of nothing left to give. But I think it's just sad kind of seeing the way that she tries to push everything into a higher purpose, but then it's just like, and then that ends. And then it's like, I couldn't, you know.
Can I just say on the United stuff as well, though, it really also irritated me that there is some tidbits there, like a little bit about the contract stuff, and she talks a bit about finding out that they were moving to porter cabins via the Athletic. But she also says on several occasions, I don't want to like say too much about United because I spent 5 years there and I have enormous respect for them.
And says
and I
so
just
much
kept thinking,
stuff.
well, why does that not apply to England and Wiegman, who
No, but
created
not
a much...
only that, Jessy,
and then she still says loads
she
of
says
stuff,
loads
yeah.
about, so the first bit before we get on to the big stuff about United, literally she says, I have no desire to speak badly of a club that I poured my heart and soul into for 5.5 years. The next 30 pages is all about United. It's all about the way that they weren't respected, the way that they weren't treated, all this kind of stuff.
Maybe it didn't hit me as much because I didn't think there was anything particularly new there. It all felt like quite
No,
public
and,
information.
Yeah. But again, you apply the same thing to England. It's like, why is that
But yeah,
the
that
one
for
you
me
break?
is like, why is United, who were the club who clearly sort of were actively like fucking you over as a team, whereas England, to all intents and purposes, were, you know, doing everything they could for you as a player, aside from maybe liking another goalkeeper more than you, they don't get that same, you know,
we will
like,
say
privilege.
allegedly fucking you over at Manchester United.
Yeah, okay, but like, you know, she does talk quite explicitly about, you know, not having to wait ages to like get a contract, not hearing for them for that, which, you know, I think has predominantly by the Athletic all been reported before. Yeah, as I say, it didn't really feel like I learned anything new.
Yeah, the late contract conversations has been a bit of a pattern of stories.
But I
hasn't it?
just found it quite stark, this sort of idea that, and I think maybe because it was publicly reported, I thought, I know there's more you're not saying here. Whereas with England, it felt like we really almost scraped the barrel on what there was to say that was
Yeah.
negative about England.
rejection is a really interesting thing to talk about in this book because it's a theme, rejection from her parents in terms of her relationship. It's just this big elephant in the room that we just never really get to talk about. And again, I feel really sad for her that there is this fallout with her partner who they obviously, like, I don't know if you read the acknowledgements, like that she obviously loves her so much and that, you know, has a really good relationship with her. And I think, you know, there's going to be a lot of queer people that read this book, and I'm very lucky that my parents are like very supportive, but there's going to be a lot of people that see themselves in that. And I think it's really sad that, again, she's still too close to it, that she can't take a step back and look at that relationship and talk about it in a way that doesn't feel just like, oh, we've just skipped past that. This whole relationship with your dad, who, you know, she says herself she isn't talking to as much at the moment.
Who she chooses not to spend Christmas with her family at one point.
It's just like so swept over, and like I was like, I want more from you here. I want to hear more about this, because I think that is the person that you are, and that's what is interesting, and that is the struggle. At least I think. I don't really care about your struggle to be number one. That is just a football story. You have been number one goalkeeper in winning Euros in a World Cup final where you saved a penalty.
And it was an even perfect
perfect penalty. You have had more success as a goalkeeper than 99.9% of goalkeepers in a professional game will ever experience. And it just feels like that's not important to me. That feels like she hasn't been able to come away from it yet and be like, that was amazing and that was really important, and these are the other things I struggled with.
And I think in some ways, though, that sums up the book, because it's like she does sort of make it very clear that she, you know, that emotions weren't like something that, you know, like was brought out when she was a child. And so it feels like for her, all of this stuff is very revelatory, because she's taken that first step to open up around some of that.
This is her all in.
This
currently.
Is her all in. The problem is I think when you're not in her head or her feelings, it becomes apparent that it's not everything.
Yeah.
And perhaps there is, in some ways, a happy ending, because it sounds like she's got an amazing relationship with her partner Kitty, and that is perhaps
she gets to live in Versailles. That sounds lovely.
I have been to Versailles. The palace is stunning. I don't think she's living in the palace, but I think
PSG do pay well.
That is the softness that makes me feel happy for her, because she's found a great partner, and she, in these pages, she talks about how much she loves her, and sounds like they have a great relationship. And shout out Kitty, whoever you are, wherever you are, because you mean a lot to this person, and that's always really nice to hear. So we talked a lot, but I guess the most important question, would we recommend that listeners, viewers, read this book?
I just read the extracts personally. I don't think I took more from... I mean, maybe, actually, I do think the stuff about her family and her relationship is... I don't know if all of that was in. I think bits of that were maybe in extracts, but I don't think all of it was.
No.
So maybe do Control F, Kitty. And I will read Mary Earps' book in 15 years' time, when maybe she's got a bit more perspective.
Part
and I'm
two.
sure we can also read all about the furore around this book.
I would say yes, do read it, because I think, you know, we got so many comments on social media. People say, well, wait till you read the whole book. Wait till you read the whole book to get the context. So I think if people are so urgent
Just read it out
to
of
do
spite
that,
so that you can talk about
no,
it.
I think you should read it to understand and unpack like we did, because I don't think it's changed any of our thoughts from Monday at all, but at least we've got more basis of the overall picture and understanding of her a bit more as a person. So I would say yes, I would say do read it for the sake of that. I don't necessarily think it's a good book, but I would say read it so that you get, because again, I think if anything, you get more stuff of her maybe digging the knife in a little bit on people, and you get more of the understanding of of everything. And I think that's important because then you're like, oh, okay, I really understand what this book is trying to do, rather than just assuming what it's trying to do from the extracts when in fact it's the same thing.
And you will learn how to eat alone.
Yeah, I guess
you
the big
will
question.
be inspired to eat alone. That is all we can say.
Yeah, I guess, did anyone feel like these chapters came true about be relentless, sacrifice for results? Are you ready to sacrifice for results,
No.
Becky?
No, I'm not.
Peace is something you choose, not something you find.
Interesting.
Uh,
She hasn't chosen peace.
yes, so
She has
true.
done the very opposite of that.
Okay, Becky, what would you say?
Yeah, I would read it because I think it's interesting, but not in the way that she intends. I don't think she intended.
If you want to sofa psychoanalyze someone, it's a pretty good
my
read.
favorite game.
Sofa-
My favorite game.
Sofa
I have done so much
psychoanalyze
of
right
that.
here.
The last thing I will say is that there was one quote at the end of the book which I was just like, what are we doing here? Where she's like talking about how she doesn't want to go to Euro 2025 because it's not her responsibility to raise the next generation of goalkeepers. Is that not what you've been talking about this whole book?
Yeah.
Is that not
She keeps
is
talking
that
about
not
Kiara
what you've
Keating
been
being
saying?
given a chance.
Yeah, and she's brought up Kiara Keating on bloody sports agents as well.
It's just like, what? She obviously is so wrapped up in it, so that it just feels so confusing, the book, because it's like she's so in it that like it doesn't really make, when you're feeling something so hard, you're so like wrapped up in the injustice, and you say things that don't add up, you say things that don't match, because you're just like, I feel all these things. Just go to therapy.
So is that yes or no on the recommendation?
Yeah, I would read it. Yeah.
All I could think by the end when she does sort of touch on Euro 2025 was how mad do you think she was when Hannah made that pass against the Netherlands? Almost more than the penalty saves, because I think she obviously thinks she could do the penalty saves.
And she was very good at penalties.
And I just thought that probably that pass, because that vindicated everything Beekman wanted to do.
Yeah, it's so funny that we won. And like,
I
she
know.
must, and she
we
does.
shouldn't have
She
done.
pretends,
There were so many times where
she
it was
pretends
going to
that
come
she
true.
feels good about it, but I don't think that's true.
She did say on the sports agent she found watching the knockouts really hard.
Yeah, the way that she's written this book, I'm like, like I understand it. I would feel the same. Like it would be really difficult, but I don't think she touches on
and
that.
she wasn't brave enough, like Beth Mead was,
Yeah.
to say that she wanted her teammates to lose, which is still one of my favourite quotes ever. And
Yes.
I have massive respect for Beth Mead saying that.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have recommendations of books we should be reading, then drop them in the comments or drop us a message on social media.
It's time for some more
because
smut.
It's time for some more book club.
Sonia
so-
in French, when?
I know that's a little bit too
Becky
much for
speaks
me.
Oui.
But I know, but it's hard. That's going to take me so long, and I'm already a slow reader, guys. Do you
Shall I
think there'll be
translate it for you?
Do you think there'll be an English translation at any
I don't
point?
know.
Well, whether
Should I ask?
maybe if they win the Champions League, there'll be
Maybe,
an English
yeah,
translation.
yeah.
Just Google Translate it. It'll be kind of right.
But Riegman's book we haven't done yet. Maybe
No,
that's one to
that's
take. We
good.
haven't done Emma Hayes' either. So there's a
Yeah.
couple that we need to probably take
My
on.
partner's
Haven't done
ex has written a football romance book. Should we?
We haven't done Beth Mead. We haven't done Steph Horton either. So yeah, all right. The list
There's a
is
lot
long.
to get into.
All right, well, we'll see you on Monday because it's a big game this weekend. It's Arsenal-Chelsea. We'll see you then.